Hello, scholars. My name is Ira McIntosh, and this is Hypothesis. Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to my office. It's time for another episode of Hypothesis, and it has been a while. I know that September is the time when school starts, so maybe many of you were looking forward to new episodes during that time, but unfortunately, because of that, just some things in my life got in the way. So I apologize for the accidental month-long break from the podcast, but we're back, and I have so many episodes lined up for you. So I hope that you'll stick around and take a listen, because the people that I have coming up are just as exciting and just as interesting as the guests that I've had so far. And maybe I'll throw in a couple extra episodes this month just as an apology. Uh, you know, the beginning of the school year is tough for a lot of people. I'm currently in the middle of applying for PhD programs myself and waiting on potential advisors to reply to me and say, yes, we're good to go ahead and put my name on your applications. We're just academia is busy this month, so I really, really hope that your fall semester has started well, that you are well entrenched into your research. And for those of you who aren't in school, I hope you've been able to hop on some of these trends. Like on TikTok, people are making personalized curriculums for themselves. Honestly, I just call that homeschooling. That's that was my life for the first 18 years. And speaking of homeschooling, today's guest and I talk quite a bit about homeschooling. We talk about homeschool cooperatives, of which I am a graduate. I have a lot of experience with that growing up in Washington State, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about accessibility to education and information, making sure that students not only understand different research methods, but that classrooms are able to communicate in a way that the students can understand easily. And then we also talk about how to preempt issues and offer support before any serious harm comes to someone receiving support from organizations, government organizations, health organizations. My guest works with companies and corporations and government organizations to figure out, to do risk assessment and to help figure out ways to make sure support comes to people before that support is desperately needed. On that note, my guest this week is Dr. Mandie Koroi. She is an academic researcher and editor with ADHD who endeavors to make the research world a space for innovative neurodivergent minds. Mandie received their PhD in educational leadership in 2023 and currently researches various social care topics aimed towards bettering social care services in the UK. Without further ado, everyone, please help me welcome Dr. Mandie Koroi. But yeah, no, I started reading your dissertation and it was just like, oh my God, I'm reading about my life. What is happening?
I know. I thought like once you like said like, that stuff about your childhood, I was like, oh, I bet like that's how you probably will like think about it. That's what I was worried about as well when I got into it, because I like got into the topic because I saw some like other people who were in those homeschool cooperatives, and they were just like so intelligent, so cool, and so smart. But then when I chose the topic, I was like, oh no, like this was going to invite all of like the super, like religious, weird trauma.
No, I just I'm so excited to talk about this topic just be for my own therapy. Um
Yeah,
but
yeah.
before we dive into that, I love to start off by asking people what their academic journey was like. Like what got you to the point of getting a PhD? Like why academia?
Okay, well, hopefully it won't be too much of a long story, but I am a late diagnosed ADHDer. So I was just diagnosed this past year, but that means that I spent most of my life thinking that I was an idiot. And so I grew up in a family of, ironically, because you know about my hyper religious past, most of my family actually have doctoral degrees. And so, it was just a lot of pressure growing up to kind of like get to that level. However, like I just like sucked at tests. I couldn't, read very well and all of this stuff. And so most of my academic journey and getting into like university and stuff has really just been trying to like keep up with, just like be like, oh yeah, I could get a degree. Of course, I like dropped out of university like 2 times and all this stuff. And then when I got into the master's degree, I did it in vocal performance. So all I had to do was like show up and sing places. I'm not saying it's that easy, but like
It's basically that easy.
that's really the only reason that I like made it to the master's degree is because I was just like, yeah, I can sing some stuff, that's fine. But when it really started to get serious is when I started to work full time as a teacher after I got my master's degree. And I started working at a school that is a private school in the US. And that it was like project based. And so a lot more like hands on, going outside and doing stuff, and also life skills based. So they started having a lot of influx of neurodivergent students. Of course, like this was kind of like also like in the realm of COVID as well. So, a lot of people were coming in. And when the more I started working with these students, I started to really resonate with like their school anxieties and their traumas and things like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, these students are so much like me. And so I started looking into researching about how, like things that could help people with autism and children with ADHD and dyslexia. But the more I started to like look into those things and apply them to my classroom, the more I started to apply it to my own life. And I was like, wait a second, am I neurospicy too? And so yeah, like as I started like kind of like thinking more on it, I thought that, oh, maybe I have ADHD, which like I always thought ADHD was that kid in the classroom that really was just wild and like talked a lot and moved around. I didn't know like the kind that I have is I have combined but with inattentive ability. So I didn't realize that like all that hyperactivity can also be in your mind, which is like what it was for me. So once I kind of started realizing that, my passion for those kids grew even more. And that's when I was just like, you know what, I'm going to just try to see if I can get into a PhD program. Because I really wanted to research more into like finding good ways to teach neurodivergent kids. And yeah, so I applied for a program. I mean, albeit I don't think it was like in hindsight, I don't think it's the greatest program, but I think it's got me to where I wanted to go. So I
Mhm.
applied for the program and I kept applying more, like of these like things about like how to learn with ADHD to my PhD life. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I passed the class. Oh my gosh, I passed the class a little bit more. Oh my gosh, I passed this. I could do this. And I ended up graduating with my PhD in like 2 years and 9 months. after I just like completely gave into like the ADHD-ness, like stopped trying to like force myself to be like everyone else in academics and give into the ADHD. I wrote my dissertation thesis in like 5 months, and then I graduated with high distinction. And I was like, never in my life. I know. I went from like being a university dropout. I went from having like a 1.2 GPA at one point, you know what I mean? To being like 4.0 high distinction. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is insane. But, as I say, like during my PhD, I met a man. I met a man from the UK. And so I knew that all of my dreams about research and like, helping my students and stuff, it was probably going to have to mold a little bit more. And so that's why I now kind of pointed towards all of the other people in my program because I feel like a lot of people who are pursuing PhDs are also struggling with like, all we're kind of from this generation of undiagnosed people, basically. And so I think that a lot of people struggle with stuff like that. A lot of people struggle with imposter syndrome and stuff. So that's how I kind of got into doing more of like the academic editing and coaching to help people like that. And then when I got to the UK, there wasn't a lot of research in my area, at least, available for education. So I ended up getting into social care research, is what I do now. However, there's been a lot of really good parallels. So yeah, I've still been able to like take that dream that I had for those students, apply it to like other people pursuing PhDs, and then also apply it to bettering social care services through research. So that's pretty much where I am now, and I have a lot of big dreams for research, but
Don't we all? I mean,
yeah,
I was just commenting on someone's video earlier today where they were talking about um people asking them, okay, but you're getting a PhD, but what job do you get after that? And it's like education is not a means to an end. It gives you tools
yeah,
that become useful later. And I think that that is exemplified in your life in that you got all of
yeah,
these tools. And so even though you're not necessarily working directly in that original research field, you
yeah.
still are able to use what you learned to help your current career.
Yeah, and I think people are just not aware of like the depth of research. I know like, some people I think kind of like what you're doing probably you go to like a degree already knowing how to research. For my particular situation, I didn't know anything about research. And so now knowing like the depth of like all of the tools and everything is like how even like like I have a qualitative degree, but now I understand so much more about how we like get like statistics and how we like get to these these generalizations or assumptions about various different things. So yeah, I just think people don't really understand like the depth of like the research world and how like really amazing it can be if you take some time to learn it.
Well, I mean, I was a horrible researcher when I started this my last master's program because my first master's, like you
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
was in vocal performance, and so it was a practical degree. I barely had to do
Mhm.
any research. What research I did was for my recital before I graduated, I had to write program notes, and that was
Of
like the
course,
written
yeah,
portion.
yeah.
And it was like
That's all you wrote.
3 pages of program notes. So like it was very rudimentary research. I went into the MA that I just got and had professors being like, "Well, why don't you know how to write a literature review?" And I'm like, "You're because
Yeah,
you're supposed to teach me how to write these things." And they were like, "Oh yeah, okay. Let's sit
exactly.
down and
Yeah.
do this." I mean, it's a very different world. But yeah, I mean, okay, so let's now talk about your research topic, your dissertation, because it's something very near and dear to my heart.
Yes.
Um, you were researching homeschool co-ops specifically in the leadership of those co-ops. What
Yeah.
attracted you to that subject?
Yeah, so like I said, I have, well, first of all, I'll probably mention her. So I should say my mom is like the qualitative director of a university in the US. So she has like, she's been a very big influence for me. And so originally when I went to a PhD program, I was thinking like, in the mindset of like, how am I going to help students? I was thinking about digital technology.
Mm.
But like, yeah, my mom came in and she was like, "Wow, don't you want to do something like super unique, super interesting, blah blah blah." So I started telling her about. I used to also, amidst teaching, I also taught music lessons part time as well. And there were some students from my music lessons who were very young, but yeah, they were like telling me like about like the depths of like Greek literature and like all of, like the history of Rome and stuff. I was like, where are these kids getting educated? Because that sounds interesting. So I started speaking to their parents, and I didn't know anything about cooperative homeschool cooperatives before I did the research. And I think I was like a lot of other people that, have those stereotypes about homeschooling and like that it's just for like, like religious people or people that have like these very like, narrow pinpoint mindsets. And so it really was interesting to me to see, yeah, like how much there really was out there on homeschool cooperatives initially. So yeah, that's just kind of how I got into it. And I think like in hindsight, it also was kind of like a parallel to the school I was teaching at, where that was just a private school. It wasn't necessarily a cooperative, but they had a lot of the same strategies in it as
Yeah.
well.
What state were the cooperatives that you were looking at in? Because the US is weird with homeschooling in that
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
regulated state
Yeah.
by state.
Yeah, so I was in North Carolina when I did this, and yeah, like that's like what my setting was as well. And I don't think there's like any. I mean, really, like for most people, like in the U.S., it's like so unregulated, isn't it, with homeschooling? So I can't think of any like specific like North Carolina things. I think as long as you can prove that there is some sort of curriculum being taught, like
Hmm.
anything is up for grabs in homeschooling.
Yeah, we definitely. I remember growing up. So I grew up in Washington State, where there's like the most freedom of most
Yeah.
states in order for homeschooling.
Okay.
Um, and it's not necessarily the most regulated, but it's there are more protections in Washington State for homeschoolers than there are in a lot of
Yeah.
states. And we had to do, I think it was the Iowa Basic Skills test
Yeah.
every year, and I I drove my parents completely crazy because I never took the test seriously because I mean we were getting very well educated. I
Yeah.
mean my dad's a judge, my mom was a former public school teacher.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We were a part of a small co-op at the time, so we were getting some really good teaching. But I didn't standardized tests meant nothing to me as a kid
Yeah.
because I wasn't used to that typical test culture. So I would just like make designs of the bubbles instead of actually answering the questions. And so my parents would get the results back and the state would be like, "Are you actually teaching this
Actually,
child?" And they're like, "Yes, we are. We promise." He just does not understand that this is important.
that's so funny. No, I remember because like in NC in North Carolina, they have something that's like the same where like you have to, I think like all the kids have to take the test, probably exactly what the name of the test is. But it's weird because in North Carolina, it doesn't matter. They're just like, you have to take the test, but then it's like, it doesn't really equate to anything in the end. It's not like they're going to be like, oh, like you're not teaching the kids. Like, I've had many a student fail, and then it's like, what happens? Nothing happens. So yeah, I don't know. I always thought that was kind of like interesting when about North Carolina, but yeah,
So what were kind of the outcomes of that study in terms
yeah,
of how of because you were focusing specifically on collaborative leadership, so not just
yes,
parents teaching the children, but parents
yeah,
having other people to kind of bring into that
yeah.
educational environment.
Yeah, so I did, yeah, like, so I focused on collaborative leadership and like how it contributes to like student success and homeschool co-ops. And so, yeah, in a homeschool co-op, a leader can be a parent, it could be an actual, like, kind of like more leadership role person, a teacher, a subject, basically like any kind of adult that's like involved in the homeschool co-op. And so, what I thought was really interesting about the outcomes is that a lot of these leaders had one, they had a really big passion for, yeah, like fostering good citizens. So they
Mm,
really, that's one of the reasons why they had a lot of passion for, especially like the more like life skill elements that often come with homeschool co-ops. The second thing was that there was an outlier in my study that was that they can make these incredible programs off of nothing. And like, many of the students and the parents were paying, probably even for a whole family, less than like $100 a month to contribute.
mm,
So I thought that was really interesting that like if you're passionate about students, if you are passionate about their education and like the future, you can really pool your resources together to be able to create, like a very meaningful and well-rounded learning environment for them. And so, yeah, I mean, in the future, if I ever get to like kind of like go back to that, I would definitely look into how that, that not having to pay so much. How does that
mm.
impact education? You know what I mean? When in the U.S. you can have schools with like extortionate fees and things like
Oh
that.
yeah.
But the last thing I want to mention about outcomes, because I think if anyone is listening and they are, those types of people that are thinking like, oh, no one's going to read my dissertation, no one's going to read this or that, is that I had an element where I used artifacts as one of my data collection methods. And so I use that to be like, show me something that you have. This is the leader. Show me something that you have that really portrays that you were successful in teaching students. And so some of them brought up, they just had paintings that kids had made on the wall. Some of them were like, oh, we were able to raise enough money to have T-shirts for our schools. Some of them were able to add like they had like a program that they had written because they had like their first play, all that cool stuff. And so for me, as I have graduated from the program and gone on, people have actually read my dissertation. And so, and so one of the things that has been super beneficial to me is, especially I think like in the UK where they're fostering these more like creative methods of research, is that, yeah, like my bosses have all read my dissertation. And that one element of like that kind of creative way of interpreting what success is through
Mm.
artifacts has been so, like, it's come up so many times in like all of my like most recent research projects, which I think is so funny. So I just think like, like that could be an outcome too. And I don't want, and anyone who thinks like, oh, my dissertation is probably just going to sit in a database somewhere for the rest of my life, like just to seriously consider, seriously reconsider that idea, because
Yeah.
there's people read mine all the time and I'm like, oh my gosh. But no, it's it's definitely been helpful. Yeah, definitely, like, yeah, like I said, the UK, they're more into like these more like creative mixed method kind of like
Mm.
research ideas. And so, yeah, I don't know, it's brought me a lot of attention for some reason. So
I mean, yeah, I backing up for a second because just in case, because
sure.
it just it just occurred to me that people listening might not know what a co-op is, might not know what a homeschool co-op
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
I,
I
I'm
know, I
so
know.
familiar with it that I'm sitting here like, yeah, of course. I mean, I'll let you define it here in a second. For
Sure.
me, what my experience of a co-op was, I actually had two different
Okay.
major experiences. So one of them was when I was a little kid. My mom had, there were a group of 6 or 7 moms who were all
Yeah.
homeschooling their kids, and so they were all kind of each other's support system, and so as a
Mm.
way to foster that, we would meet once a week, and they would bring in, like, a special art teacher, or we'd go on a field trip to an apple farm, or, like, we would just do things as a group
Yeah.
together. So that was kind of my first experience of a co-op, and that's a very kind of basic, rudimentary, like, more support group kind of a co-op. But then in high school, my parents realized that they couldn't teach me and my sister things like Latin. They couldn't
Of
teach
course. Yeah.
calculus. They couldn't teach AP English. Like, there were certain things that they knew they could help us with, but then other things that they knew weren't going
Yeah.
to be within their wheelhouse to make sure that we actually understood. And so we enrolled in a homeschool co-op that, well, first it was a there was a resource center, which was kind of weird, that we mostly went to for like theater and choir, and like having a little bit
Yeah.
more
Okay.
of that experience. But then the co-op was, um it was basically my friends' parents were teaching us, and we were being taught by people who had PhDs in English, who had
Yeah. Yeah.
like high level math degrees, language degrees, classics degrees. And so we were really getting this kind of intense, almost pre college experience
Yeah.
while in high school, but for a much lower price than going to
Yeah. Of
private
course. Yeah.
school. So it wasn't, there were some teachers, like my favorite science teacher was a man that they contracted out to. His name was Brian Raven. He's since passed from this plane of existence, but
Mm.
so there were some teachers who they would kind of contract to bring in if there wasn't a parent who either had time or expertise to teach a subject. But
Yeah.
for the most part, it was my friends' parents who just happened to have wide-ranging higher education degrees who were like, yeah, of course, I'll teach this. Let's get this done. So it just allowed us to have that fully rounded education on top of being able to have some basic social skills that that
Yeah. Of
helped us
course.
moving into later in life.
Yeah, I think that kind of description of homeschool co-ops is like what impressed me and interested me about it in the first place, because yeah, there are several of them out there, yeah, that have kind of like what you said about like a pre-college kind of level of learning. And but yeah, I think also it's important to add to that definition that a co-op can look like so many other different things as well. So
Mhm.
sometimes, yeah, you might have a co-op like yours. You might have a co-op that does like more of like a specific regime. What am I thinking? I don't know. Curriculum. That's what I'm thinking.
Curriculum, yeah.
I was like regime, like Montessori or something like that. But
Mm.
you could also have co-ops that are more like, some of them are like, farms. The kids can go
Mhm.
and like learn for an hour and then go pet the animals and do some chores or something. One I even worked with when I did my research was even like a musical one. So like they did like an hour of school, but then all the kids were involved in these like, amazing choirs and stuff like that. So yeah, it's very malleable. The definition of a homeschool cooperative, I think, it can look like a lot of different things, and it can cater to a lot of different people. But yeah, at the end of the day, really, it's just when families are coming together to homeschool their kids, or at least like in a non-traditional kind of education way of educating their kids, you know what I mean? And yeah, I mean, they just kind of do that through the community, essentially,
Mhm.
and so yeah, like the classroom is either your kitchen or it's the YMCA, or it could be a park somewhere as well. So that's what I really like about it in general, is just yeah, all the different ways that a homeschool cooperative can look.
Something that I noticed in your dissertation, was that you noted that, um, when former homeschoolers grow up, they tend to be, it's been documented that they tend to be much more community focused, that they tend to be
Yes.
a much more, much less individualistic in terms of how they
Yeah.
move through the world. What are some of the ways that you've seen that, or some of the examples of that?
Yeah, I think, like what it comes down to is that collaborative element, isn't it? So that's like the research when I was doing it says a lot about if you see the leaders of the school doing this kind of like collaborative working together, then that kind of like, translates to the students and they learn to work together. So, there's always that stereotype that, oh, in homeschools people aren't socialized and blah, 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 blah. But really, in reality is like when you have that element of collaboration, people learn how to communicate get better, to solve problems better, to work together better. And so, like in the cooperatives that I saw, before I started my research on it, I noticed, yeah, a lot of them were involved in many different kind of like community activities as a part of like that homeschool group. So they were doing like dances and they were like volunteering at soup kitchens and things like that, which is something that like also the school that I used to work at, we used to do those kind of things as well. So I think that the kids that I've seen graduate from like those homeschool cooperative programs, I just think like they have like more of like a well-roundedness to
Mm.
them, and I see that they understand how to be committed when they go to university. They understand how to be committed to their studies better. They understand how to like take care of themselves and living in a dorm and things like that better. And then yeah, I mean, I think that all just contributes to yeah these kind of mix of different learning things, like yeah just like traditional learning and life skill learning. But I think collaborativeness is really at the epitome of it all.
One of the things I remember the most from high school math specifically, because I was terrible at math, like truly
Yeah.
terrible. And in my senior year, my parents were like, no, you have to take pre-calc. Like, we don't care if you never use this again, you have to take pre-calc. And I
Yeah.
was like, I barely got through geometry and algebra 2. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know what you want from me, but okay. Um, and it got to a point, I had a really fantastic teacher. Um, and I think she actually listens to this. So hello, Mrs. Talkley, if you're listening to this. I had this really fantastic teacher who, by the end of the school year, realized that I was just struggling because I wasn't good at rote memorization. And a lot of math
Yeah.
at that level is memorizing formulas and just getting very specific things just stuck in your mind. And I was not good
Yeah.
at that. And so it got to the point where she was like, I don't care if you can memorize these things. I just want to make sure that you understand the concepts and get through the class and demonstrate that you have understood the concept. So there were times where I would get stuck on a test because I was just like,
Yeah.
I'm supposed to write this formula down. I don't remember what it is. And she would let the students around me lean over and help me on a question, not to give me the answer, but just to like help me with the formula, or be like, no, 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 move this over here, just to kind of get me there. And it really instilled in me this understanding that education isn't there to be authoritative, it's there to help,
Yeah.
and it's there to be a tool. um and it's really kind of informed the rest of my life in a class that I hated,
Yeah.
not because of the teacher, but I hate math. I'm sorry, I will forever hate math. If I ever have to do quant
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form, it will be the
No,
worst part of
yeah.
my life. But that lesson showed me that, just what you were saying, that collaboration is more important, that the
Yeah.
understanding is more important than doing things a traditional way.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that like yeah, like kind of what you said with like as long as you like understand when it comes yeah, when it comes to education, I think again, yeah, like you don't want to have all of these things that they try to like teach you and memorize. In reality, it is like those like underlying things that, become your core memories and that you use throughout life, right? Yeah, because it's like I have no idea what I learned in geometry or chemistry or anything like that. I can't remember any of that stuff. But yeah, it's like I remember, yeah, the teachers' similar experience. I remember the teachers that let people help me out. I remember the teachers that, were understanding about like learning from a different way. And so that's how I've tried to apply my life as like a teacher, but as a person as well. And I think that's so much more
Hmm.
conducive to the world, as to your community or to the world, rather than trying to force someone to memorize 85 digits of pi.
Literally. Well, and I think at least in my experience, and please feel free
Sure.
to expound on this or say what the research, because of course my experience is only one person and it's from a very specific part of the US, so
Yeah.
I had a different experience of homeschooling than someone in the East Coast. But um it was drilled into me from an early age that the best method of learning is the Socratic method, because it allows for that conversation, and it allows the teacher is there to guide the learning. It's the
Yeah.
teacher isn't there to say, here is the only thing you should be learning, learn this from me and go forth and teach it to someone else. Like
Yeah.
it's a collaborative environment where the teacher is saying, okay, so here's this concept that we need to talk about. You take the floor, I'll guide this and get us to a useful and productive point. but
Yeah.
but you're part of this environment too, and your mind is just as important as mine.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely
Yeah.
informed every part of my life, when I've taught, when I've been a private voice student or voice teacher versus a classroom teacher during my first master's, to the reason why I want to be a professor is I want to be that for someone else. I
Yeah.
want to show
Yeah.
them that even though they're the student, their mind and how they think is
Yeah.
just as important as my mind and how I think. I just happen to have schooling behind me so I can guide you a little bit more easily.
Yeah, I think your perception is 100% right. And I think that, like, personally, I parallel in the same sentiment of like, yeah, like, especially like when it comes to research, it's like I want to be somebody in the research world that people, understand as like someone that is willing to work with you to understand. Like research concepts can be very difficult, right? But it's like I want to work with you and I want to talk with you. I don't want to just like, blah blah blah, this is what it is at you and expect you to understand. And so that's why I make
Mm-hmm.
a lot of like resources and stuff, that are, like simple, like easy to understand versions of research, because I want like the world, this neurodiverse world that as well, that's like just for the first time being able to like come up and get into higher education more openly and persistently. Like, I want to show them that there is a world of people out there that want them to succeed. And so, yeah, I definitely think, on the higher academic level, that's important. And then, yeah, back like when I was a teacher, I wanted those kids to know that I was speaking to them on their level. I never spoke down to a kid. I always spoke to them like, we were just, just people having a conversation. I always involved them, and that's what they would tell me in the end of the day, is that like, like the lectures that I gave that were most meaningful was the ones where, they were able to incorporate more of like their thoughts and their interests into the topic as well. So yeah, I just think like overall, yeah, that collaborative idea in education is, it's what really we need to like start to refoster, in the world. We get so into like traditional education, first of all, where I think that we're starting to miss a lot of like critical thinking skills and critical analysis skills and things like that. And then we have a lot of, I'm sure like your research stuff has kind of like touched on this, but we have this next coming generation of people who learn in a very short form, very like, point blank kind of manner. which, you know, to me is a little bit, it's a little bit like, ooh, a little bit unnerving. So, you know, I hope that I hope that in the future, like, you know, if we can, as a, yeah, people who want to be researchers, if we can really get this collaborative element and teaching people, yeah, through short, that's why I do the social media, teaching people through
Mm.
short form media, teaching people on their level, you know, like gamification is a really big thing
Hmm.
for kids these days. Then yeah, we can really start to reintroduce a lot of the like really core things that I think, like in terms of like really thinking about information and what's true and what's false, and analyzing stuff. Anyway, that's a little bit of a rant, but that's how I feel about it.
No, absolutely. I fully agree. And I think it's interesting to me that that particular idea. Let's go down this rabbit trail for a second. So
Sure.
that that particular thought of needing to adjust educational styles for students who are used to short form content and whose attention spans are much shorter, it just makes me think of when I try to read a lot of books. I don't have a
Yeah,
great attention
yeah.
span. I never have. And something that I found is when a book has really long chapters, it will
Yeah.
take me forever to finish that book because I'm just
Mhm.
like, oh my God, I have another 20 pages before I can take a break. And then my mind starts wandering and I'm just like, where am I? I have to
Yeah, I
reread this
get it.
page versus a book that same number of pages, but the
Yeah,
chapters are like 5 to 10 pages long.
yeah.
All of a sudden, oh, I'm halfway through the book. It's like oh, I don't want to sit down for a full movie, but I'll binge watch an entire TV
Yeah,
show in one sitting. And so I
yeah.
wonder if even doing something like that, like it's not dumbed down. It's
Mhm.
just reformatted in order
Exactly,
to keep people's attention. And it
exactly.
people have been doing that for hundreds of years. Like short stories are
Yeah,
nothing
yeah,
new. Um,
exactly.
and like the book I was reading yesterday that has really short chapters is by Roland Barthes. Like it's
Yeah.
heavy material, but it suddenly kept my attention because I was like, oh, I only have 2 pages left. Great, I can do that. I can handle that, and it let
Yeah.
me focus in. So I think a lot of teachers who are like, oh no, my students can't handle this, and they just can't sit still long enough. I'm like, well, it's okay to adjust to
Adjust
different
the
learning styles.
curriculum,
There will
yeah.
always be different
Yeah.
learning styles out there.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree. Yeah, I think that, you know, like I listen to audiobooks. And so,
Yeah.
because, yeah, like with the ADHD, I can't just like sit and look at a book. But
I do my
I,
best, but yeah.
I know, yeah. And so I really think it's interesting because, especially when listening to books, you can tell the people who are trying to reformat, yeah, like the book structure to be more friendly to that short form. Yeah. And it sometimes it almost comes across as like you're reading a young adult book or something like that.
Mm.
But yeah, like it's interesting how people, yeah, portray the information in this like kind of like shorter chapter kind of way. I've also noticed like have you ever watched like a Mr. Beast video?
I haven't. Even though I'm
That's
a
okay.
millennial that grew up with YouTube, Mr. Beast was
That's okay.
never he
This
was
I
never on my
feel like,
radar.
yeah, I feel like he's an even like later than us kind of situation.
That's
But like
fair.
sometimes,
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes I would like just watch things just to know like what my students were like into.
Hmm.
But Mr. Beast, if you watch his videos, they're like 30, 45 minutes long, but they're almost cut like they're like almost like a trailer for the video. So every time
Mm.
I watch one of the Mr. Beast videos, I start to think like, wait a second, is this the trailer for the, when is the video going to start? You know, because he has like this very like precise way of editing videos that like, it's like, yeah, very like short pieces of information that feels like you're watching a trailer, but then in the end you watch like this 45-minute long episode. So yeah, I just think it's really interesting how media is already starting to portray, go get that demographic, that younger demographic. So why is it not education moving
I
that
mean,
way as
I
well?
remember when I was in college in 2008 to 2012, I remember being told even then that the human brain cannot focus on a singular topic for longer than 10 minutes. So if you're
Yeah,
going to study, have like three things in front of you and do 10, 10, 10, 10 break, 10, 10, 10, 10
yeah.
break. And so it's so funny to me that we're now the ones being like, oh, these young kids, they don't have an attention span. We were told to do things for 10 minutes and then stop. Like,
Yeah, yeah. And then they have like all those other
reel
things,
it
like the
in.
whatever. Yeah. Like yeah, like the Pomodoro method or like whatever it is. It's like they've been telling us forever, like study in short things, take a break, blah blah blah.
Uh-huh.
It's like, yeah, now, yeah, it's funny when they're
And
like,
now
oh
we're
my
just
gosh. Yeah.
blaming YouTube and TikTok for killing our attention spans, when
Our
really
attention.
that's how
Yeah,
some humans
I
work, and
think
it's totally okay.
yeah, I think we're just like kind of like evolving to understand that like yeah, that's just
Mhm.
how the mind really works, isn't it? So no
Yeah.
wonder they've grabbed onto it like wildfire. So
So okay, so moving forward from your dissertation topic to where
sure.
what you're researching now.
Yeah.
So now you're working in you're a social worker in the UK. Are you
Yeah. Well,
working
not a
with
social.
adults?
Yeah. So I'm not a social worker, but I'm
Okay,
researching in social work. So I work with social workers.
got it.
Yeah.
So are you researching people who work with adults, who work with teenagers? Like, what is the
Yeah.
demographic you're looking at?
Most specifically adults right now. And so, most recently in that paper that I sent you, it was adults with self neglect. So basically, people who are trying to live on their own, but maybe their house is really dirty or they're a hoarder or something like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, and just looking at how services treat people and assess people who are suffering from that self neglect.
I found it really interesting that there's a whole review board of people that sits and
Yeah.
when something goes wrong and someone ends up seriously harmed or passes away because of some kind of neglect in the
Yeah.
system, that there's a board that sits down and says, okay, where did we fail? Feels like
Yeah.
something that probably exists in the US but doesn't exist
I
to the fullest
know.
possibility. But it's just it's encouraging to hear that. But
Yeah.
then how does that actually function?
Yeah, so well, I think that's what they're trying to figure out right now. So yeah, like you said, like I've not done anything social work care wise in the US. So I don't really know how it is, but I was very impressed with like all of these things that the UK has to really kind of focus on improving their services and things like that. And so I was equally surprised when I got on this project and they have yeah, like they have that review board. So whenever anyone dies, they go back and they say what could we have done anything differently to prevent that? And so, yeah, the outcome of that is it's not necessarily like that great streamlined right now. And that's what I've been working towards. So, it's not that there's like, this overwhelming amount of like, oh my gosh. And then after we knew that, everyone went away and learned all of this great stuff. And now we never do that again. It's not that simple. It's so complex
Mm-hmm.
in social care because, yeah, one, a lot of research in the UK is going towards healthcare instead of social
Hmm.
care. But now they're really starting to look further into those social care things to help a lot of social workers, have insane amounts of incoming, needs every single day. So it's really hard to implement those things that you look at from those reviews and say, okay, what could we do better? It's really hard to implement it when social workers are just basically bogged down every single day, with all of these different things that they've got to worry about. And so, yeah, I think like in the future, what my research is kind of like pointing towards is looking at the learning cultures of different social care organizations in the UK and seeing how they best learn in terms of. I did a little like pre-research on it recently where, people were like, we don't need an email that's like 85 million pages long that you want me to read on like what could I do
Yeah.
better about my practice. You know what I mean? Like they were like, I just want an infographic and that's it. And then I think it's also going to point towards in the future of more community services. So like basically voluntary services that have nothing to do with like social care, but these services actually help the community before crisis or before they need to go to social care. And so I think they're really interested in looking down that pathway as well, to help mitigate this like overwhelmingness in the social care system right now. So there's a lot of really interesting things
Well, I
that.
mean, that makes a lot of sense because if you're a care worker who is having to juggle many patients all at the same time, you're not
Yeah,
going to have time to sit down and read 80
yeah,
pages on how can you do better. You just want the like
exactly,
quick and dirty,
exactly,
where did I mess up? How can I do better? Great, moving forward. Like it's
exactly. Yeah.
hard to especially at the government level, it's hard
Oh
to
yeah,
figure
yeah,
out how to get the best information to as many people as possible in ways that they can take it
yeah.
in.
Yeah, and then especially like I think like a good example is that like a lot of our research it always points towards like, well, you need more person-based approaches, you need more community-based approaches. But then it's like, yeah, these social care workers, like what time do they have to go and like be able to visit somebody and say like, oh, like what,
Mhm.
like what time do they have to go out there and be a part of the community when they have to take care of all of this stuff. So it's like the solutions I feel like are starting to be very blaring, but it's
Mhm.
like we can't do anything about it, if we've got all these people just trying to survive.
Well, I mean, I think if it makes me think about in during lockdown in the US, we
Mm,
where with the whole defunding the police movement, that
yeah,
that was kind of a driving force of that movement. And I hate to say it, I really think that movement was poorly named, mostly
yeah,
because a driving factor of that movement was kind of reallocating the funds to make sure that social workers got the money that they needed for training and that community
hmm,
efforts got the money it needed for training and that
yeah,
every kind of caseworker and care worker had what they needed, instead of just saying, oh, this person's mentally ill, just send the police out and they'll take care of it, because
yeah,
they're not trained for that. They don't have the background to help effectively. And so things
yeah,
just kind of fall apart. And that was, you talked about that in the paper that you sent me, that a lot of these situations come with the 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 service user. That was the term that you used. The service
yeah, yeah,
user has a lot of previous trauma that can be informing what they're going through, um and why they might be resistant to certain forms of help and certain forms of care, especially
yeah,
like dementia patients or people with hoarding disorders and things like that. There's It's not just the current issue, that there's a
yeah,
lot of back issue, and if you don't have the ability to train the people who are helping them to look for those clues or to ask those
yeah.
questions, then they're not going to be able to give the best care. But they don't have time to even do that kind of an
To
assessment right
even
now.
Yeah, and that's why I think a lot of my research I'm currently doing some research on like here they call it like complex care and complex cases, which yeah, basically means there's a lot of different things going on for the service user. And so yeah, it's got to be based more in like trauma informed. It's got to be based more on like person centered approaches, and really understanding the person, but also understanding, yeah, like the different, yeah, like the different elements of people in terms of like you might call the ambulance if you see someone like wandering outside or whatever. Like, it's still important for social care workers to understand what the learning and the standards of knowing is for those responders, as it is for
Hmm.
them to know, what the thing for the social workers as well. And so, yeah, I mean, like, complex care is just as it sounds, it's
Yeah.
complex.
Well, and it
Yeah,
reminds me in like very basic terms. It reminds me when I was working in retail, I would be a closer or I would be an
yeah,
opener, and you don't necessarily know when you're a closer what the openers need, and you don't
yeah,
necessarily
exactly.
know when you're mid shift what the closers
Yeah,
need. And so a good company will move people around throughout the first couple of weeks, so you can try
yeah,
out all of those different things and see what those needs are. But that's a very
that's a really good.
reductive way of looking at it. but
I
but
think that's a good
it's
analogy, though.
it's hard when it's an ambulance driver and
Yeah,
a
yeah,
social care worker. Like those are two very different jobs. You can't send a social
yeah,
care worker out on an ambulance call
yeah,
or
exactly.
an ambulance. Like it's not the same thing. So that's why I'm saying it's reductive, but it's a similar conundrum that they're dealing with, in that if you don't know the needs of the person that you're working with, it's hard to give them the tools and for them to know when the other person can step in and help them
Yeah.
without some of that cross training.
Yeah, so that's just why I think, like, when we're talking, yeah, looking at like complex cases and stuff, right now it's like I'm trying to point more towards, like I said, like community-based things. So
Hmm.
those kind of like, and those gatekeepers within the community that can kind of help with, or kind of the early intervention of crisis and like these more complex cases that can help, like, kind of be like the link between the person and, the responders and the social workers and stuff. Also looking at, like, almost creating a new realm of like these well-being officers who basically, yeah, again, like they're trained in their specific community, and so when their specific community needs something from a service, then that person can advocate for, whoever needs to. So yeah, there's just a lot of like really interesting things here. I just think in the UK, I've learned, that there's so much more like caring for the person and caring, and and you really do see.
People
I
have
know,
needs?
I know, I
What?
know. People have needs and they
The
need to be
government
taken
can care
care
for
of.
its people?
The government can
What?
allocate time and money for research and to improve their services. It's amazing. Yeah, I don't know. It's just blown my mind. It's blown my mind since I've been here, and I'm just like, sometimes I'm even just like, oh, like how much are we're caring? Okay, we're caring. Because you just get into like that like U.S.
I
mindset where it's like you're never gonna see the outcome, but here they try really, really hard to
Yeah.
like improve, upon what they've got to deliver. So.
Well, it was very interesting when I was living in the UK. I lived in the UK for like half of 2019 off and on, and then at the beginning of 2020 I got stuck there during lockdown. Um and while I was there, I was like, you know what I want to do, because I'm a nerd. I want to go watch Parliament. I went and sat and watched parliamentary proceedings, and at that time they were discussing healthcare. Um and I just remember sitting there next to my then boyfriend and being like, oh my God, both sides of the aisle care about their constituents.
Yeah, I know.
And he
I
looked at me and
know.
he was like, are you okay? Because like, shouldn't they care? I'm like,
I
yeah,
know.
yeah, they should. The only people that the Speaker of the House clearly didn't care about was when the the MP from Glasgow stood up and was like, "Are we going to do something about our drug problem?" And the Speaker of the House was like, "We're never going to listen to you. Just sit down." And I was like, "Oh yeah, England does not like Scotland." Uh,
Yeah.
but it was such an eye-opening experience to be looking at them. And sure, I didn't agree with all of their logic and I didn't
Yeah.
agree with the ways they wanted to do certain things, but it was so mind-blowing to me to see both sides of the aisle
Yeah. Yeah.
stand up and be like, "Okay, but my constituents are telling me this and we need to do this." And I was like, "Oh wow, imagine if our senators and representatives in the US thought about their
Like
constituents."
what, yeah, like went and like fought for us, because it's, yeah, it just blows my mind, because like again, like I'll just sit there as like an American, sometimes I'm just like, wait, we care, we care, okay, okay. And then like I know, like, because like I can be like a very passionate person, and I want to go in and make, you know, like a change in the community. I want, you know, to be a part of an organization that like cares about people.
Hmm.
But you know, like to actually see how broad that is in the UK, where yeah, they're actually actively looking after their people and like the residents, and things like, even like I talk about, like, you know, like I actually see where my taxes are going to, you know, like in my community. And it's such a mind-blowing thing that
Yeah.
like there's so, yeah, there's so much like thought and care and passion for the community here, that yeah, sometimes it's just really taken me aback.
It's just I think that's ultimately just it's down to the system
Yeah, I agree.
that's been set up, because I could go on a long rant about that,
Yeah, of
but
course.
don't want to bring up Alexander Hamilton every single time I
Of
talk.
course.
But it's interesting that the studies that you were talking about in the in your paper, were you were discussing things like how the social workers' hands are often tied by administrative
Yeah,
requirements and things, and they could see
yeah.
that people are needing help and they could know what would help them, but they can't always do it as
Hmm.
quickly as needed because there are administrative roadblocks.
Yeah, yeah. You know, oh, that is kind of like a one thing about it, though, about the UK, is that they are, you know, yeah, even though I think that they are very into like, yeah, creative solutions for things, they still are very much like, yeah, like paperwork, very much like fill out the forms, follow the procedure kind of situation. And so I think, yeah, in social care, in my experience in the social care realm, that's kind of also a big thing that holds people back, is the procedural bit of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, like yeah, it's kind of crazy as well, because you know like what the solutions are, but yeah, you're bound by those statutory things,
Yeah.
to, yeah, that not, you can't really, you know, get out of as well. So yeah, that is one downside of it, definitely.
So so where do you see your research? You've talked a little bit about it, but where do you see your research really going down this avenue? And what
Yeah,
kind of things are you looking forward to
I
researching?
think, yeah, I mean, I think like for myself overall, I want, yeah, I said a little bit, but like I want to be like somebody who kind of really revolutionizes research for, yeah, like a broader world. Like, you know, I'm all about like the neurospicy people. So like a world that's like more friendlier, a research world that's more friendlier to many different minds of thinking. Because I think that all these different variations of minds are what is really going to start to find, you know, the solutions that we need. And so that's like my overall perspective. Eventually I think that I'm ironically like kind of getting ready to do some more research in homeschool co-ops, or home education. They call it home education here, not homeschool. Home education co-ops in the UK. But do I think I'm going to go down the strictly education stream? I don't think so, because I think that I can find more uh, help for my community, more help for my community, maybe staying more on like the social care path. And so eventually I would like to, yeah, focus more on specific types of people, such as people with autism or yeah, people maybe like, people experiencing homelessness or hoarders, and really like pinpointing those key issues among different groups. But I mean, really overall, just staying and researching in the community because that's really where I think I've thrived and I've found a passion. So, yeah, with the ADHD, like, my interests are wide and eclectic, and I could go to, if you said go research neuroscience something tomorrow, I'd be like, sure,
Okay,
let's
great.
go be, I know, I'd be like, that's fine. If you were like, let's go be a marine biologist, I'd be like, that's great. But yeah, like what matters to me is like the community, and it's so great to have like a research community where I'm at that are really into like co-production and yeah, making a difference within this where I live. So
That's awesome. Well, that brings us to the synthesis questions.
okay.
So this is a series of questions, and I don't want you to think too hard about the answers.
Okay, I'll try not
Um,
to.
and it's only 7 questions. Don't worry. It's not a lot. So the first question is, what is your typical executive dysfunction and or rest day activity?
Just watching TikTok every day, all day. That's just like it just helps me, that's just the best way for me to debrief my mind. I know people probably would be judgmental
Mm,
about people watching too much social media, but for me, that's how, like, because my brain gets so, especially being in research, it can get so keyed up and hyper focused that it's like I'll never get any rest. So like for me,
hmm.
watching the TikToks, that's just how, like, it just works for me. That's how I get my rest and my peace.
Oh yeah, I had to explain to my therapist that when I watch YouTube right before bed, it's not a screen time issue. It's a I
Yeah,
just
I
need
know,
something
yeah.
stupid that's gonna turn off the thoughts.
Exactly, that's all I need.
um, what is your favorite setting for working on your research?
Right now it is this setting that you can't see, but in front of me there is a giant window, and I live in this wonderful little neighborhood that has a nature trail. So there's all these like lovely trees and things. And so I just like to sit and stare out the window and research.
Nice. What is one thing an advisor has told you that has stuck with you? And this can be good or bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know I've said this to you. I say this like every single day of my life, but like my mom, she wasn't technically an advisor, but she worked in the same realm as my advisors. So she says a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And I know we're not necessarily
Absolutely.
and I know we're not necessarily talking exclusively about dissertations, more so just like research as a whole. But I think like that's something I still use when I'm doing like my research in like the real world. Is
Hmm.
that sometimes you just want to get really passionate about it and go down all of these different rabbit holes and loops and stuff. But at the end of the day, you just got to get it done, and that's really been
I mean,
helpful for
research isn't
dry.
useful unless it's published,
It's
and you can't
published,
publish it if you just are
exactly.
constantly doing every little thing. Yep. Um, if you could choose any other area of research, what would you choose and why?
I would really like to do, well, I think when I get really, really old, I'm going to go back and do some research in music because
Mm.
I really just, I mean, music is always my first passion. It's what got me into academics in the first place. It what has made me survive this entire school education journey. And so I know it might sound crazy, but if I ever either get rich or make it to a fairly old age where I don't really need to do anything anymore, I would like to get another doctoral degree in music.
Do it. Do it. Who is one other academic whose research you really admire?
I don't know if I have a specific one. I really like one of my advisors. Her name is Dr. Quindag, and she is a person who writes a lot of research, kind of more like narrative research on music, but she writes it on like these really interesting topics, such as like I just edited one for her that was like what kind of space makes or how does music make a space like a religious space for God. So she's definitely still
Mm.
in like that religious realm. But whenever I read her papers, she just has such interesting like thought processes to like how music kind of like molds our perception of spirituality and religion. And so yeah, every time I get like one of her papers, I'm just like, oh, let's see what she's got going on. And it always kind of takes, even though yeah, it's like a religious lens, it kind of takes me down like a reflection of like my own life and thinking of like different spaces and how music kind of like makes that space the space it is. So
That's awesome. I love that question. I mean, it's
yeah.
I
And
feel
that
like a lot of my research in my last master's was about how to make spaces work for all five senses. And
oh
so music
yeah.
is a really important aspect to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've not really thought. Now I'm like, oh, I'm going to think about all my favorite researchers now. Sends me on a rabbit hole later.
What is one question you've never been able to answer?
Gosh, I don't even know. Probably, uh, what, what is the meaning of life? Which I know is like is silly, but I think like for me, what drives me through life is like that is human interest. So like that's why I'm involved in like all the things that I'm involved in and research and like the social media stuff and all of that is because I'm interested in like the human experience. And then like just to think that there are infinite amount of ways people can define the meaning of life to me
Hmm.
is just like that's what makes it exciting for me.
No, I love that. And then last question, what font do you wish you could present your research in?
Oh my gosh, I can't do anything other than Times New Roman. If you ask me to do anything other than Times New Roman, because like all these people, when they want me to write their papers for them, they want it in like a Pittos or whatever it is, or Georgia. I did Times New Roman. That's what it is for forever and always.
I'm a confirmed Times New Roman hater, but I'm just always curious who out there actually likes it. So I'm glad someone does. It needs some love. I'm
Yeah,
definitely one of those.
I know it's
My
a bit
my
old
favorite is
school.
Garamond. I love something that looks a little
Oh yeah, of
older, but
course.
but well, thank you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the pod. It's been wonderful to get to talk to you, and I look forward to seeing where your research goes and staying in contact over the years. I'm just
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm just excited to have met another great researcher, millennial researcher in the world. So,
And thank you all for listening. Bye.
bye.
It was such an honor to sit down with Dr. Koroi on this podcast. Thank you so much, Mandie, for sitting down with me and having this conversation with me. And I hope that those of you listening learned something or got some new information from that. If you have any questions concerning this episode, feel free to send us information. You can submit questions via our Instagram at hypothesispod. You can also send us questions via email at podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. That's podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. Or you can send us an audio note on SpeakPipe. That's speakpipe.com/hypothesis podcast. That's SpeakPipe, speakpipe.com/hypothesis podcast. And the questions can be anything from the academic to just life questions in general. They can be humorous, they can be serious. Anything you want to ask me and my guests, please go for it. We are here for you. So interact with us on our socials or via our email or our SpeakPipe page. You can also follow my own social media on Instagram at Ira A. McIntosh. That's IRAAMCINTOSH. That's Ira A. McIntosh. You can also find me on TikTok at The Gay Ethnographer. And most places you can find me at The Gay Ethnographer. I'm also on YouTube. We'll see if that YouTube channel gets souped up soon. And we also have a website on the way, so be on the lookout for that. So please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast with your friends. You can do this on any of the platforms that you listen to us on, and we'd be so very grateful for you to share this little podcast with those you love. And those you hate, honestly, share it with anyone. Word of mouth is the best way to get the word out. So thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for listening. And let's fight misinformation together. Have a wonderful day and go read a book.